Hello, welcome to the Robots and Pencils Academy. I'm your host, Jonathan Rasmussen. Last episode, we looked at how to build a basic login page using the UI text field, making the keyboard disappear, and then ultimately logging someone into the application and basically seeing how a login page might work. Now, while this was a good start, there are a couple things that aren't exactly great about the solution. First of all, the spacing around these elements is something we could improve. They don't really conform to the human interface guidelines, and I'm going to show you some tips on how to make sure your elements are spaced correctly. The other thing that's not great is right now when someone taps in our text field, we have no way of dismissing the keyboard other than entering some text and hitting enter. I'm going to show you how to dismiss the keyboard when someone taps anywhere on the screen. Thirdly, remember we needed to tag these UI text fields so we could identify one from the other and make sure that when we were getting the username and password, we could tell which text field we were getting. We did that with tags, but after going over this with my colleague David Anderson, he explained that while this works, it's not exactly the best way to handle this problem of trying to identify one text field from the other. So I'm going to show you his solution and a more elegant way of doing this. And fourth, I'm going to show you how to allow someone to log in and hit the login button while the keyboard is displayed. Right now we can't do that because it only accepts text after we hit return. I'm going to show you how to fix it so you can do a login while the keyboard is up. So just before we begin, if you'd like to follow along, just hit the pause button and go download the source code from episode 12 login page. That's what I'm going to be using to make these enhancements on. All right, let's start with the spacing of these UI elements. As my colleague David Anderson pointed out, one of the recommended human interface guidelines is that our elements have about 8 pixels of spacing between them. This isn't necessarily a hard and fast rule, but it is a nice rule of thumb just to make sure we aren't overcrowding things and our elements are spaced out decently. Let's take a look at how we can do that. Let's start with these text fields up here. First, I'm going to select this text field, and while holding down Shift and the down arrow, you can see how I can move it kind of in a coarse-grained way, or if I just push the down arrow with no shift, I can move it in a very fine-grained way. This is nice. This shows me how I'm sliding my elements, but what I'd like to see is what's the space between this element and this one. If I hold down the Option key, you can see how these numbers appear around the element I currently have selected. And this is great. It tells me if I've got some spacing issues. You can see I've got 52 pixels on the left and 31 on the right. That's not great spacing. I'm going to grab both of these, hold down the Option key, and just slide them both over until I get a more equal distribution, 41, 42. Let's go with that for now. That's a bit better. Likewise, you can see my login button's not quite centered. I'm going to slide it over and just kind of align it with these guys. Now, if I go back to selecting this bottom text field and I hold down the Option, this is great. It shows me the spacing to the edges of my view. But watch this. If I move my hand over another element, it will show me the spacing between elements that are nearby. And in this case, I've got 6 pixels separating myself from this text field above. I want 8, so I'm just going to press the down arrow twice and get a nice 8 separation there between my 2 text fields. If I come down here and select Login and press Option, you can see I've got 22 as a spacing here between my text field element. Now that might be okay. I might, be accepting of that, but I'm just going to move it up to 8 also, just to get it nice and tight. And now I've got a nice separation between each of my elements here, something more closely along the human interface guidelines recommended by Apple, which I highly recommend reading. Next, let's look at how to make the keyboard disappear if someone taps anywhere outside the range of our UI text field here. Here I'm in my viewcontroller.m file, and to make that keyboard disappear whenever someone presses, what I'm going to do is just add a method here. This is a delegate method called touchesBegins, and what it's going to do is it's going to capture the event, and as soon as it gets it, it's going to call end editing on my view. And if I run that now, when I come and select my text field, if I tap anywhere, notice how that keyboard disappears? That's just a nice user feature to make the keyboard more convenient if someone wants to change what they're entering in one of those text fields. And finally, let's look at this, these tags that we use to separate our username from our password text fields. Remember, we needed to separate between them so we knew that when we got our callback for text field did end editing, we knew which text field we were getting text for. It turns out that while tags are okay, they're not always recommended because There's just more elegant ways of using them, and they should kind of be used as a last resort. What we can do instead is, instead of checking the tag to see what text field we have, we can ask the text field to see if the text field we currently have when we get our callback is equal to our username text field. And by doing this, we don't actually need these tags here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these tags that we used last episode. And I'm just going to show you what that looks like if we pull those out. Again, tags are just sort of they're okay as a solution, but they're not always the greatest. We really don't want to tag just because it is a little bit fragile. So I'm just going to pull these out. And if we go ahead and run that, I'm now going to type foo bar return login. Okay, so that's all working. But there is one annoying thing. Did you notice that if I type in a password here that's wrong, and I dismiss this and I log in, I just want it to fail. Watch what happens if I type in the correct password now and I hit the login button. See how it still fails? That's because it's remembering the last password I entered, and the way we have it right now is it's forcing me to hit return to register that text value and then do the login. Let's take a look at how we could actually click login while that keyboard is up and have it accept our password. To do that, all we really need to do is when our login pressed button is actioned here, all we need to do is resign the first responder to both the password and username text fields. If we do that, that's basically going to give up control of the text field. We should then be able to grab it, and we should just be able to log in by hitting that button. Okay, let's try that out. Okay, so now if I come in and I type, say, a bad password, and I try to log in, okay, it doesn't like that. Now if I type in the correct password and I hit the login button, there we go. Excellent, that's much better. Well, there you go. Thank you very much, colleague David Anderson, for showing me a few ways to improve the screencast. Those are just a few simple things we can do to make our user experience better when people are trying to log in. Next time when we get together, I'm going to show you how to handle the case of actually moving screen elements when that keyboard comes up. There's some really neat ways of doing that. So stay tuned. We'll take a look at that next time. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you then. Cheers. Bye-bye.